explain grid buffer. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to explain grid buffer in the context of a find browse form. Okay, so this find browse form that I'm going to build is going to be completely managed by me. Runtime is not going to do anything for me. Okay, so I am not going to link it to a business view. So what is going to happen when I run this? I'm going to call this no BSVW, no business view. When I run this application, I got my find button that does nothing. I got a grid with no columns on it. It's empty, does nothing. So if I link this to a business view, runtime automatically going to do my select for me. Runtime's automatically going to copy my BC to my GC. Runtime's going to do all that stuff for me. Now what I'm going to do instead of that, okay, is I'm going to program when you click the find button, go and grab some data and through code populate the grid. Okay? And there's a more advanced, better way of doing that I'm not going to show right now. I'm going to just show you the concept of a grid, what a grid buffer is in this one. Normally, you would not want to program it this way. I just want to illustrate the concept. Okay? And you do program a bit this way. It's just that when you're fetching an entire grid, normally you're not doing it this way. Okay, just keep that in mind. So I have two choices when I do this. Okay, I can program my entire logic in my find. Here I'm going to show you like some good a bit of a good practice. Okay, I can program the find directly in the find. So when the button is clicked, I'm going to write some event rules here. I have some variables that are linked to this, but a better practice for doing that is to have little mini functions. There's no such thing as having little mini functions on a form, but it's accomplished through invisible buttons. Okay? You create a button, you associate logic with that button, you hide the button, and programmatically you press the button. Okay? That's how little kind of functions are kind of done. Now there's no data that you can pass to these functions. Right? So if you want to pass data between button clicks, it's the global variables. It's the only thing. It's the only way you can accomplish it. Variables defined in the form. In the form, in the context of the form. Yeah. Okay. So in this case, I don't need to pass any variables. I just need to load the form. Now the reason that also it's better to do it this way is because if, let's say I want to load the form when I click find, and I also have a button over here when I click that I want to load the form as well. But I could just press the same button, right, to load the form. I don't have to rewrite my code again a second time in the second event. This is why this is a kind of like something that you'll see a lot. So I create a button. On that button, what I normally do is I prefix it with something. FN for function. Okay. Function dash, and I'll say load grid. I'll make it invisible. So it's available to me over here. So in here, I'm gonna program the logic to load the grid. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to a table. It's a very simple table in JDE that has the companies, list companies. So when you set up your JD Edwards environment, you set up your company. So SF Marketing. We used to have another company called MusicWhip. It's still in that table. It's still in the file. We renamed it to SFMUS. Okay, we don't use it anymore, but it's got to stay there because of history that we've had. And JD Edwards also has another parent company that we called SF Marketing. So in this file, we're going to have 3 records. Okay, I'm going to go and just programmatically loop through those and just put it in the grid. Okay, so first thing we need to do is, well, let me just show you the table. Open up UTB. It's F0010, I think. Yeah, company constants. Okay, there's 3 records in there. I'm just going to show these 2 fields here. Okay, so Option one, which would have like I would have normally done, is create a business view on this, associate that business view with the form, and boom, it's done for me. Okay, but I just want to illustrate the loading it myself. Um, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a column CO and a column name, but I don't have a any business view to add, right? So I'm going to add it from the data item. So CO and name, and here what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a table input output. So every time you're going to retrieve data, a good chunk of the time you're going to do table input output. You're going to use that quite extensively. There,
Go directly to
you go directly to a table, but normally a lot of times you're going in JD Edwards is very data centric. It's not like C sharp where you're programming the like you do have business functions to accomplish that, but a lot of times you go straight to the table. Sometimes there's business functions that are already written that'll do some sort of logic for you and retrieve some data, but a lot of times you go straight to the table.
Okay.
Okay, so you're going to see table input output all over the place
Like
in JDE.
for instance, to get the user defined.
You have get UDC to do that, or you can go straight to the table.
Yeah, but it's better to because
it depends. Yeah.
And it has a tab in front, the user defined.
Yeah, there's a little space. There's a spacing. Yeah, there's a spacing problem. Yeah, yeah. And this the business function takes care of the logic to remove the spacing and then do the table. But in the business function, it's doing table input output.
Okay, because I spent like over an hour figuring out that I was doing the wrong.
Yeah, but that's it. So a big challenge, and then the part that's going to be like the part that's going to take a lot longer is for you to understand the data. Okay. Right? To know how the data is stored, to know how the data is linked, to know what is a purchase order, what is a sales order, how is that stored in the system, what are the tables involved in it. That's the thing that's going to take a lot longer. Because once you understand the data, then you can know how to, what do I have to retrieve? Where do I have to save my stuff? You know, what is it? How does JDE read those fields? And I'm, to be honest, today still learning the data. It's huge. It's huge. Even the stuff like the one table, 4211, for example. Okay, it's the sales file. I'm still learning how JDE uses certain fields. So if I set that field, for example, to a 2, JDE will interpret it as this. If I set it to a 1, JDE will interpret it as this. I still have to dig today to figure these things out. Okay, so on the button click, table input output. The basic operations, fetch single, I showed you already. Okay? When you're going to loop through some records, you're never going to use fetch single. Fetch single is get me one record. What you're going to use is a combination of select and fetch next. You're going to use both of them. This builds your where clause. This fetch single, it's where and what you want to retrieve in one shot, in one statement.
The first one.
The key is your where clause. Everything else you're retrieving, you're fetching.
Yeah, but it retrieves just the first.
The first one it finds. First one it finds. So it assumes it should be a primary key a lot of times, but sometimes it's not just a primary key. Just the first record you return. Okay. If you have multiple records, whatever you can accomplish with fetch single, you can accomplish with a select, because you just fetch next once. Okay. But so the combination of select and fetch next is looping through and reading a bunch of records from the database. It's similar to in C sharp, your data reader. You execute the data reader, and now you have an open connection to the database, and you loop through the data reader. Well, the fetch next is your loop, is your like fetch next. Fetch me the next record, get me the next record, get me the next record. Okay? Where your select is you're defining your where clause. So the first part you start with is select. So I'm going to go to that table, and I'm going to select. In this case, I have no where clause. So select, normally I would select based on something. I can't click finish here saying you have to have at least one where in there. Okay? So the only I very I don't think I've ever used it. Okay? Select all. Select all is basically a select with no where clause.
Okay.
Okay, I've never used it, but for this particular demo, I'm gonna just grab me everything in that table.
So select star
So
from.
select star from is select all. Okay, I don't think I've ever used it.
Okay.
Maybe once in like 12 years. Okay, select all. It doesn't even have to define. I don't have to define my where clause. It then just
Gotcha.
pops it up. Go now. Fetch next. Give me my next record. So F0110, F0010. How many constants? Now what I'm gonna do is gonna put this into a grid buffer column. Okay? I don't have to put it. I can put it into. I can't put it into a grid column because if I put it into a grid column, I don't have a line.
Correct.
So I don't have a grid column to put it into. I could, if I put it in here, nothing's gonna happen with it. You know what? I'll show you. Nothing's gonna happen with it. Fetch next. Okay, so right I did right there. I got the first record.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so when I run this, actually this might show a record on the first line. I'm not sure. No, it doesn't show anything. Okay, because I don't have a record. I haven't inserted a record into the data into the grid. So I have a few options. Okay, you do have some options you can work with, but I'm going to show you the the proper way of doing it. Actually, sorry, I never called find. So on the find button, I never called my function.
Okay.
So I'm going to call a system function under general. Just press button. Press button.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to have my button here. I'm
Okay.
just going to press it. So it's going to call that little hidden button.
Okay.
So I'm going to just run that again. And I doubt very much it doesn't have a record, so it's not going to insert anything. No records were inserted in there.
But did you press find? Or you don't have to press find?
I'm going to press find when the dialog is initialized. Post dialog is initialized.
Okay.
I can. This is generally what I do. Load it right away. Press button. Find. So when the form loads, it's going to press find. Okay, you're right. I didn't press it. So let me try that again. Still nothing.
Okay.
Okay. So what you normally do if you want to load a grid is you put it into a grid buffer column.
Okay.
That still, I'm going to run that, doesn't do anything. It's just in a buffer.
Okay.
So it's not in the grid. There's a system function called insert grid buffer row. System function in here. It's related to the grid called insert grid buffer row.
Uh-huh.
So there's two of them. I won't explain the difference yet
Uh-huh.
because I vaguely remember it, but I don't have it 100%.
Yeah.
Okay, this has to do with a certain event that gets triggered.
Okay.
And I don't remember which event it is, but if we can read the documentation, they work slightly differently. Silent means it doesn't trigger that specific event. It inserts it, but doesn't trigger an event. This one triggers that event. But I don't remember which event it is. Okay, so insert grid buffer row. What grid are you inserting it for? There's only one grid in this form.
Yeah.
This grid. Where do you want to insert it? I can insert it at a specific location, and it's indexed. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can insert it at a specific location, or I can just say, just insert it after the last row that was inserted.
Okay.
Selectable. Do you want to be able to select this row? Yes or no?
Uh-huh.
Protected. I don't remember what that is. Updatable. Do you want to be able to update this row? Do you want to be able to delete this row? Do you want to clear the grid buffer variables after you've inserted it? Sure, why not? Doesn't matter. Sometimes I say yes, depending on the scenario. Sometimes I say yes, sometimes I say no.
Yeah.
What that just did now is I took the data, I put it into my grid buffer row. When I call this system function, okay, so where was I? When we copy into the grid buffer, okay, so what we're doing is we're putting data into the GB columns or GB variables. When I call the insert grid buffer row, what it does is it inserts a row, takes whatever's in the GB, puts it into the GC.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
So right now I'm gonna insert basically one record, the first record it found. It's gonna programmatically insert it. Didn't find anything. What the heck's going on here? Hang on. What the Hang on, I'm just troubleshooting a bit here.
It's good.
Yeah.
Oh,
What the heck is
it's
going
not
on?
writing the.
I don't know why it's not working. This is a. I just did it yesterday.
So this is supposed to write the first
I'm supposed to
row.
write. Yeah.
One row.
Oh, I think I know what's going on here. No. To be honest, I have absolutely no idea why this is not working. What?
The button doesn't get triggered.
The find button. It's like it's working on a. Hang on a second. It's because it's still like working on like a business view. But I don't have a business
Make
view.
it as an entry point.
But it's not the entry point. It's
No?
okay. Me, I normally don't do it on a find button. So forget the find button for now,
Mm-hmm.
because the goal of this is not to show you the find button. It's to show you the GB and how it works.
Yeah.
And then we'll figure out why it's not working on a find another time.
And which button do you use usually?
I usually load example. Well, I do. I have used it on a find, but not on a find browse form. I use it on a find in a
Fetch.
in a headerless detail form.
Okay.
Um, I've also used it to add records. So, for example, for every record that it finds,
Yes.
add more records.
Okay.
Okay, so I've used it in that type of manner. I could show you a form later that I
Okay.
built yesterday.
So it performs like a sub-query.
It's not necessarily a subquery, but like you perform a subquery,
Yeah.
and then you insert before the next record it gets inserted by the runtime.
So, but the button the button the push the function that pushes the button perform a sub-query. No.
Are you referring to right now, or are you referring to
No, the one that you
the
said.
one that I built yesterday? Is like a subquery. So it's not, it's sort of like a subquery. It's like for every record, do a query and populate some data.
Okay.
Okay, so forget the find button for now. I'm gonna go back to this, and I'm gonna remove this and go back to where I was at the beginning, which was this one here. Okay,
So we remove the function that triggers the button.
yeah. What I'm gonna actually do, actually, I know what I'm gonna do. Put it there for now and see if that works. That'll probably work for now as a workaround till I figure out why that's happening. Yeah, see, it works now. Fine, works. Okay, so forget that for now. My point is not how the find reacts when there's no business view. The point is that what I'm doing here is I'm going to grab everything in that table. I'm grabbing two columns,
Yes.
putting them in the grid buffer, and I'm using the system function insert grid row silent, grid buffer row silent. Takes whatever variables in there in the GB, copies them to the GC, and inserts a row in that table or in the grid. You'll notice that the GB will exactly match your GC. So whatever column you put here, you'll have a corresponding GB record for it. Okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop. Here's another technique. So but one technique that I showed in this was the button, to have a button do your action for you, a hidden button, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that you'll do a lot is looping. So do a where and then loop through the result set.
Mm-hmm.
To do that, you do a while statement.
Yes.
And there's a special variable called SV, system variable, file input output status. So you say while the file input output status is equal to success. So
Mm-hmm.
what that does is this fetch next. If it finds a record, if there's another record to fetch, it's success. There's no more, if you call this and there's no record, it goes to error. It'll exit the loop. So a lot of times what I do is I take this and there's two ways of doing this. One copies your fetch next twice. You have to have two of them
Why the first one?
because because
Okay, to enter the loop.
to enter the loop to
Okay.
begin with.
Yes.
Fetch the first record. Was it successful? Yes. Continue.
Okay.
Fetch the next record. Was it successful? No. Don't go to the loop.
Gotcha.
Okay. So that's one way of doing it.
Yeah.
It's my kind of preferred way. The disadvantage is that there's two of these. So if you make a modification here, you always have to remember copy that, paste, delete the old one because these have to match 100%.
Yeah. So let me guess. You define a variable.
Yeah, there's variable and you do it. There's an if and there's a different way of doing it. This is my preferred way. I'm only going to show you this way for now.
Okay.
Okay.
I like it this way.
So then you take whatever code you want to do inside of that loop and you do it here. Fetch next is the last thing you do.
Right.
Get me the next record. Then it comes here. Was there a next record? Yes. Process it. So doing it this way is nice because what you can do is that's your code here to process your record. So what I'm doing here now is I'm selecting everything and this code here is looping through the result set and inserting a grid buffer row for every grid buffer row that gets returned. So first one goes into GB. So it's successful, inserts the record. Get me the next record. Fetch me the next record into the GB. Insert that one. Fetch me the next record. Insert that one. So this is looping through the result set. And this, okay, you'll see all the time because you're always looping through records. So you're saying, grab me some data with a select. Normally this is select with a where in there. No select all. Fetch next, while, fetch next at the end. Whatever code is over here is how you want to process that. So in this case, I'm not doing much processing. I'm just saying whatever data is in the table, put it in the grid buffer. But there could be a lot of processing that you're doing in between, formatting and all that stuff. So now with that loop, it's gonna populate that grid with all three records. I did that programmatically. The runtime didn't do any of that stuff for me. JDE, okay, I'm just going to mention it now. I'm not going to explain how to accomplish it properly. But remember at the beginning I said you would not want to load your grid this way. 99% of the time you would not load your grid this way. And the reason for that is because JD Edwards by default, when you put a business view in there, takes advantage of paging. right? And paging is super important to performance, like super important.
Yes.
If you, for example, look at a sales files have hundreds and millions of records in it.
Yeah.
If I were to do what I just did there
Yeah.
on a find button on the sales file, I'd be looping through a million records before I showed the thing to the client.
It's gonna show a million records too.
It's gonna show a million records. It'd be way too long to process. So JDE, what it does is it pages 100 records at a time, right? And it pages it efficiently.
Yes.
So the runtime, when you hook something up to a business view,
Yeah.
the runtime will automatically take care of that paging for you. There's a special event and a special way of looping through records to to do exactly what I just did,
Mhm.
but also take advantage of the paging functionality of JD Edwards.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm not going to show like it's a little more advanced. I'm not going to show it right now.
Yeah.
My point in all of this was how you populate a grid buffer row. What's the point of a grid buffer row? It's just to buffer your grid entry. So
Mhm.
you write values to your grid entry, and then you call this function to take whatever values are in there and plug them into your grid.
Mhm. So this select all the this function,
It's a table input output, not function.
this table input output
Yeah.
writes always to the business.
What do you mean writes to the business?
Updates the business grid.
No, this can put select all.
Yeah.
It just is telling the event rules, telling the code to go and grab every record in that table.
Yeah.
I don't tell it I don't tell it where the data is going yet. I
Okay.
just say what table do I grab the data from?
Okay.
This is now looping through that, retrieving record by record, and then this is what's putting it in the GB.
Can you put it in?
I can put anything I want. Look, I could do this if I want.
You could have put it in the grid column, no, right?
I could put it in a grid column, but a grid column will not show.
Oh.
Because when you
Okay.
insert a grid row, it's taking the data from the GB and it's inserting it into the GC and adding a line. There is another way of doing it,
Okay.
but
I
it's a
understand.
lot more. This is the way they want you to do it.
Okay.
There is another way you could do it by passing to GC, but
Okay.
it's you're gonna have to manage a lot more code to do that.
So
But
then
yes,
you have to render the GC the.
there is another function called insert grid row, insert grid column.
Mhm. Okay, I
This one
understand.
here,
So this one insert. Okay.
this one here, insert grid row.
Okay.
Sorry, this one, insert grid row. If I insert a grid row this way, then I could add to the GC.
Right.
But there's a lot more management that I have to do there because I have to manage my row. I have to trust me.
Okay.
There's this is the way they want you to
So
do it
this function takes the business column, puts it in the grid column,
and inserts a
and
record for you on the screen.
and renders the record
Renders a record. Yeah,
on the screen.
yeah.
Okay, it does three things.
It well it does two
Two
things.
things.
Copies the GB to the GC and inserts a record.
Okay.
Okay. So one other thing I'm going to mention. Okay. So the three things that we learned from this video. Okay, is
But
one.
this data then when it's fetched, select all here.
Yeah.
Where is it put?
Nowhere.
Oh, we don't see it.
This is just building your where clause.
Okay. And fetch all. And fetch. Fetch next.
Fetch next is where once you hit the first fetch next,
Yeah.
it's going to execute the query,
Yes.
and the runtime is going to execute the query in the background. So it's going to be select star from,
Oh, okay. Okay.
and then it's going to say get my result and put it in here. Get my first record, put it here. Get my second record, put it here.
Okay. Got it.
Okay.
Yes.
When you're using select and fetch next,
Yes.
okay, you should always be opening and closing tables.
Uh-huh.
So you open the table first. Now, I've run into issues sometimes not doing this. A lot of times, if you don't do it, you'll get away with it. But the good practice is when you're working with table input output, open and close the table. So open the table, do something on it, close it. That's the best practice. Fetch single opens and closes automatically for you,
Okay.
or that's what I read anyway. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I've run into issues maybe 2 or 3 times in 12 years
So
where I
this.
don't do it and it causes me problems.
Okay. So this defines right here is select everything, but this defines where the where clause. Is it?
Well, yeah. There, select all means there is no where. It's gonna be everything in the
Yeah.
table. No where
But
clause. You
this
have
one.
no. You can't click it.
Yeah.
But normally I'm never doing this. Normally I have a select, not a select all. Okay, and I say give me everything here. Let's see what's common in this table. This DOT1. It's all
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
I'm going to select everything with a no.
Yeah.
DOT1. So I'm going to go DOT1. I'm going to create a variable called DOT1.
Yes.
That's what it is, the multi-currency.
Yeah.
I'm going to set that to a no. I'm going to do a, so I'm going to, and then I'm going to do a select on F0010. And I'm going to say, get me everything where that is equal to whatever variable's in there.
Okay.
And that, I'm going to put that there, and I'm going to move that one out. So normally this is what I'm doing. Select with a where clause. That's my where.
Okay.
That column is equal to whatever data is in that field. What data is in that field? No.
Ah. Okay. 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 Okay.
So it's going to say select star from this table where that field, which is DOT1, so CC DOT1 is equal to N.
Okay.
Okay. And then loop through the result set.
Okay. But this one actually fetches,
This one's doing the fetching. So
and this one is just the
so this
definition.
this this is a little, to be honest, it does not, this select will not execute
That's what I.
the actual query.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay,
That was my
the
question.
first fetch
Okay.
initiates the query,
Okay.
because I can tell you right now that this does not do a select star. Okay, it does a select CCCO CC name, because that's all I'm using.
Yeah.
It's not going to select the rest of the stuff,
Uh-huh.
but it doesn't know until the first fetch what to select.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so the first select does more than one thing. It executes the query and grabs the first record. The next fetch next doesn't execute a query again. It just uses the exact same result set that got returned back from the query and just gets you the next record. But programmatically, you don't have to really think about, like, it's nice to know how the runtime is working behind the scenes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But what you really have to worry about here is what data do I want to grab and then loop through it,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
Behind the scenes, it's doing, it's executing at a certain point in time and it's doing whatever.
Yeah.
But um, okay, so summary of this video is like 3 concepts I think that you learned. One is the idea behind the GB.
Yeah.
So the GB is a copy of the GC always, and usually when you're programmatically programming grid rows yourself, you're going to put values into grid buffer rows, and those grid buffer rows you're going to call a system function called insert grid buffer row silent, which is going to take whatever values are in the GB and it's going to insert a record and copy it to the GC. Second concept is looping. You're going to see this all the time where you're selecting some data in a table and you're looping through the result set. And then inside that result set, inside that loop, there's a special variable called SV file input output status, and you're gonna loop through. You're gonna fetch next and loop while the file output status is successful. Execute some sort of code that you want to hear be done on each record that you retrieve, and at the very last thing, you're gonna fetch the next record to initiate the next loop. Good common practice, which is best practice, is to, when you're doing that, at the very beginning open, at the very end close your table. You're not limited in table. Sorry, okay, let me go to the next concept. The last concept is loading the grid. Sorry, the using a button to initiate logic, which is simulating like a little mini function within the form, so that you can call something in multiple areas. So example here, for example, let's say I wanted to have a button here. Let's say I wanted a button or a little, let's say a checkbox here. And every time that checkbox changed, I want to reload the grid.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
Yeah.
If I programmed it in the find button, or if I programmed it, then I would have to kind of reprogram it. The nice idea behind this is that I can call, say, when the selection changes, press the button.
Mm-hmm.
Press button, load grid. And I could call that wherever I want. And my code is in one spot. And my variables are in one spot. Everything's in one spot and it's nice. Okay? So that's the in summary what this video is showing. And the last thing I want to just mention here that came to mind uh, while I was summarizing is the table input output. You're not limited to going directly to a table. You can also, if you look here, you can go to business views as well.
Okay.
So you can define a business view with 5 tables in it and do a select, and it's going to grab everything from all of those tables in one shot.
Okay.
Okay, so you could have one table to one business view, or you can have 3, 4, even 5 tables to one business view, and you're selecting based on that business view. What the runtime is going to do in that case is going to do an inner join.
Yes.
Select from this table, inner join this table on your whatever you define your business view to do your joins.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to do that automatically for you in the business view, and then whatever record you want to retrieve from that business view, you can retrieve. So you're not limited to tables. You can do both. That's it.